Hello and welcome to GreenFleet Talks. My name is Kate Armitage and I'm your host for our discussion today. And I'm delighted to be joined by Dan Eyers, who's EV Fleet Sales Specialist at Drax. Hi Dan, nice to talk to you today.
Good morning, Kate. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Lovely for you to join us. It's the first time we've spoken. Today, Dan and I are discussing fleet decarbonisation and considerations for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Dan, by way of introduction, can you tell me a bit more about the services that Drax offers to fleets?
Yeah, so I work for Drax, Drax Group, and we are the largest renewable energy provider here in the UK. And basically, we're going into electric vehicle charging as well to add on to our customers. So we're supplying customers with renewable energy, but we're now moving into EV charging into fleets and destination charging.
Great, thank you very much. Right, so Dan, I speak to a lot of fleets, and in the last few months, it feels like I've spoken to quite a few organisations that are going to be placing their first orders for electric vans imminently. For organisations that are looking to electrify their fleets, what are the key considerations when it comes to charging?
So, Kate, there are several considerations that organisations should consider when looking to electrify the fleet. But as an EV driver, I think there's three big topics or three big hurdles that as a driver, everybody always wants to address straight away. And that's range, cost, and infrastructure. You've probably heard this many of times, and it's a common thing because range, everybody's always scared of, does the car get there? Is there a range anxiety? Do I need to stop? And when you see people and you drive up in your electric car and they say, oh, how many miles does that car do? And you say, oh, just 300. And the first thing they always say is 300 miles. Oh, that's not a lot. And my response to that is how often do you drive 300 miles without having to stop? And in a day, not many people drive that. The second bit of that is cost, vehicle costs. Yeah, there's always a debate for that, Kate, and I'm sure that's probably a debate for another day, but there's lots of incentives out there and financial rewards to swap into EV. But I think the key bit about this today, and this is why we're here today, is to talk about the infrastructure. This is the most important bit, because if you don't get the right infrastructure right from day one, then it could be set to fail. And there's a lot of people out there who are anti-EV at the moment because they're still used to that petrol and diesel and not used to change. But the biggest key points I would always factor in about the infrastructure is, where can those vehicles charge? You know, if you're a depot or a workplace, is there enough electrical capacity that's there on site to have multiple charge points, and to charge throughout the day? Do employees actually take the cars and vehicles home from work? And will they need to charge an off-road facility on the driveway at home? And the final bit about this is, will drivers of fleets need to use public charging points when they're en route to top up as well? So that's a key point. In my opinion, most likely it'll be all three of all the options. I think I work on the road quite a lot and I'm using quite a lot of public chargers, but I'm also using destination chargers when I'm staying at hotels, and then I use my home charge as well. So I'm using all three when I'm out and about on the road. But the big thing that fleets and the big questions that everybody always asks when it comes to fleet charging is, why do I need to charge it at home and who pays the bill? Now, Drax have partnered with MENA to offer customers home charge and charge pass. Now, let me explain a little bit about this in a little bit more detail. So home charge offers drivers automatic reimbursement when charging at the home. And charge pass is available to give access to over 11,500 public charging points. And this is where the invoice is sent direct to the company. So the employee or the fleet driver doesn't have to pay this themselves. Very similar, Kate, to a fuel card, which many organisations have been used to for such a long time. But I think one thing that organisations need to think about is, do the vehicles need to stop throughout the day during the working day to top up? So a prime example of that is, if I live in Manchester and I've got to go all the way down to Ipswich, will that car get me on a full charge from Manchester to Ipswich without stopping? Or do I have to allow additional time in the day to have a top up? And the key bit about this is it's all about driver education as well, because if you're driving 3 or 4 hours down the road, you're going to have to stop anyway, legally. You're going to have to stop to go to the services. Why wouldn't you want to top up? But then there's also instances where people might have a smaller commute where it's, I don't know, 100 miles or 80 miles, and they might not need to stop. And if that's the case and they're in the office all day, they could use a slower charge. So instead of having a fast charger that you use at the services, you could actually have a slower charge. But in reality, if your car starts at 100% in the day, and when you're going round, if you need to top up, you can do. But it's just picking those charging up on picking the right chargers at the right time when you're out on the road.
Yeah.
If you're only driving 20 miles, 30 miles a day, do you need to put it on an ultra fast rapid charger? Probably not, because it would probably actually get you home if you're only driving 20 or 30 miles a day on
assuming you've got a home charger, which of course is a problem for a lot of fleets.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we've talked about MENA before in GreenFleet talks. Their home reimbursement solution is extremely good, and the point that I always make when we talk about the reimbursement, of course, you could go down the AER route, but we know that it doesn't really reflect costs, so that's a bit unfair on the homeowner. But in the last 18 months, where we've seen energy prices go crazy, if you're reimbursing someone through their payslip, that could be quite a lot of money if someone is refueling or recharging every other day on their home charge point. They'll see a nice chunk of money in their payslip, but with a cost of living crunch, that money may not find its way to the electricity bill. So there could be this bill shock further down the line where your direct debits haven't been covering your consumption and you're suddenly in energy debt. And that, as an energy company, that's particularly important that you're protecting employees from that.
100%. And as a business, if you imagine you've got a fleet of whether it's 50 drivers, 100 drivers, or 500 drivers, it's the same complex and the same questions that everybody's always going to ask to say, well, why should I foot the bill? Why should I have to pay this?
They just won't. They
exactly.
They just say, no, you've got to give me another way of refueling it. Yeah.
But then there's also options of where there's company vehicles, where they're fleet vehicles. They might not always go to people's houses. They might go back to depots, to offices, to workplaces.
Right, so let's have a talk about that then, Dan, because not always, but in the majority of circumstances where I talk to fleets, they are looking to install workplace or depot charging for their electric vehicles, possibly not the whole fleet, but to have a core effectively of charging abilities. So what are the key steps that fleets need to give thought to when they're thinking about workplace charging?
That's a good question, Kate. And one of the most important factors I would say personally is the organisations have to consider the electrical capacity that's there in the office, the workplaces, the depots. Is there enough capacity to help electrify their operations day-to-day running? Or is there additional power needed? Well, if additional power is needed, what you'd have to do then is have a conversation with the local district network operator to discuss the process. There's a lot of things that businesses should consider when thinking about electrifying the fleet. And some of the things are, I would say, specification, implementation, management, and charging of the actual infrastructure. So there's quite a lot of key points that you have to get across when people are putting charge points in. It's not just a matter of putting a charge point on a wall. There's quite a lot of processes. And what are the steps involved with this? Can you actually manage the charge points and this step by step internally, or do you have to outsource this as well? Should they contract an electrification partner as well to provide an end-to-end support and expertise? And then what you've got to start to look at is what type of EVs and the EV suitability that you're looking for and the right chargers. Because when you speak to people all the time, they always expect the fastest charger at the fastest time. And it's absolute nonsense because decars always need that. And what you need to look at with the vehicles is what current mileage are they doing at the moment? Are they doing long journeys? Are they doing short journeys? What's their average mileage? Because you might have a fleet that does a mileage of, say, 100 miles a day. Electric's perfect for them. They might be touching that 400 or 500 miles a day, and that's where you might be saying, well, we need to look at putting additional charges in different workplaces or depots, en route charging. And then we need to look at, we call them long dwell locations as well. So this is kind of where you might do an 8-hour day work, come back to the depot, and then you're not coming back for another 12 hours. If that's the case, the vehicles could be on a slower charge,
Yeah.
charging overnight. So as long as the vehicle's at 100% or ready to go when you get the charge and you're not waiting around, it doesn't delay your day the next day, then that's what a lot of people are looking for. But ideally, Kate, what you'd be looking for when you're putting charge points in is an electrical site survey. So you're starting to look at, well, how much electricity is on the board or in the building, the actual locations of the charging points as well. So are they right near the office or are they right at the far end? And that can put people off as well, because if it's raining, Kate, I'm sure you've done that dash across the car park where you've got to get from your car to the building. But most importantly, the results of the electrical survey will also lay the foundation of the planning installation logistics as well. So you've then got a timescale of what's happening. And when you're going into the installation planning, you're then starting to coordinate your hardware to make sure that it doesn't happen when the labour's happening. Also, disruption to the site. So you've got to think, well, when's this being installed? When are the charge points being installed, and how will it disrupt my business? Because a lot of the times, if you're digging the main car park up, it could disrupt the business quite a lot. But most importantly, do you have a project manager to oversee this project? And is there a clear communication of who's responsible for each part? So whether it's the civils part, whether it's the electric part. And you know what, this might sound even daft. Have you got a little section or a little bit of time to educate the drivers on how the charge points work? Because every charge point's different. And who's going to be managing the charging infrastructure internally within the business. So that's one clear point that we would say is making sure that you've got the right contacts and the right people involved at that day one.
Okay. I mean, gosh, the stacks there that you've mentioned, Dan, all great advice. I had the pleasure of talking to the fleet manager at Royal Mail recently. And they've electrified about 10% of their depots, which is a great number because it's a massive fleet. And he made the point, which I think is great advice, that they haven't just done the easy. Within that 10%, they've got a mix of really complicated workplace depots and then more straightforward installs. But it's the one thing that really came out of that discussion with him is that no two depot location is the same. So if you've got multiple sites, you can't just assume, because this one costs this much, this one will be the same. And you talked about, is there enough power? You talked about where the charge points are in the car park, all of those kind of things. And, my experience and my advice is definitely try not to predetermine those things. Wait until the site survey is being done and let Drax advise you on the best place to site the charge points according to where the incoming power supply is, the cable run, mitigating civils works. If you can put a charge point on a wall, it's much cheaper than digging up the ground and putting tarmacking something into the car park, and so on and so on. So there's so many considerations that this first site visit and letting you design the best can really make a difference, can't it?
Absolutely. And what you've got to look at is how you can future-proof the site as well. So you've said you might be able to install 1 or 2 charge points, but looking at this in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12-month plan, how many vehicles are you going to electrify your fleet? And then how do you roll that out to have you got the infrastructure in place? And it could be a differential in the installation when you're installing multiple charging points in the future to have the power all at one location. So you're not having to go back to the internal side of the building to keep running cables back from each charge point. So what you're looking for with that is then to future-proof that installation. And it might cost more doing it the right way first time round, but you'd rather do that than pay a lot more further down the line when you're having to add additional charging points.
Dan, we've seen this in our roads, in our pavements outside our house, time and time again, where the gas company dig it up, and then the next week the telecoms company's digging it up, and it's so frustrating. So so certainly, if you are going to be doing civils works and trenching, then you really only want to do that once.
100%. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So let's talk a little bit. The government, the government has now mandated that charge points need to be smart, which is great. it would be good to understand what your definition of smart is. And I would also like to just discuss load balancing in that context and how important that is for workplace charging in particular.
Yeah, so I've been in the industry now for 9 years. So originally when 9 years came out and I came into electric vehicles, the charge points was called dumb chargers. Now a dumb charger is kind of where it's got no communication inside it. Let's say as it is, it's a glorified plug socket that charges a car. But smart technology or smart charging is the next step in the EV world where it needs to be. And this is kind of where the first charge, where it's come to market. The smart charger can provide additional functionality, such as energy load management. We'll talk about that in a moment. Restricted access. So you can, if you're a business, you can restrict who you want to have access to the charging points. You can do remote start and stop status as well. Session monitoring and much more, including data management and receiving the charge point data. But when you mentioned about load management is absolutely key, because there's only so much power that a building can actually put out there, whether it's for operation use or for EV charging use. And what you've got to realize is if a vehicle sat there for 12 hours, we associate vehicles as moving objects, but actually for 90% of the life, they're actually sat there still doing nothing. So they can actually sat there at a slower charge, just topping up at a slower base. Because if they're parked there for 12 hours, who cares if that vehicle's charging an hour or 2 hours time? As long as the driver comes in 12 hours time or 10 hours time and it's fully charged, that's all that matters. In terms of the smart charging, as a business, you want to control who uses your charge point. So that might be a good question for another day, but have you got fleet cars and then you've got employee cars who wants to use it? Do the fleet cars have it for free because they're company vehicles, and do your employees have to pay for it because it's their own personal vehicles?
And you can start monetizing that investment.
100%. Yeah. And you can enable charging throughout peak and off-peak times as well. And most importantly, you can help with high peak grid demands as well. So there's always people saying about, we're having blackouts if we're all turning these chargers on at this time. It's absolute nonsense, because if you've got smart chargers, you can actually program your car to charge at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning when it's an off-peak tariff for that to happen.
Okay, and am I right in thinking, Dan, that actually as the fleet manager or as the driver, it's simply a question of saying when you're going to need that vehicle again and what state of charge you need it to be at. And the software does everything else. I mean, it's not like there's someone in the background desperately trying to work out, who do I give the power to next? That is kind of dynamic load balancing at its best, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And what you don't want to do is employ people to do that exact role that you've just said, Kate, because at 2 o'clock in the morning, you've got one van, at 3 o'clock, you've got this van. It's too confusing. What you would need to do is have software that would override that and take it over. So load balancing is key to any business that's looking to scale up. If you've got one charge point or 2 charge points, you might not need dynamic load balancing or dynamic load management. But if you've got a fleet of vehicles where it's 100 vehicles or 50 vehicles, you would definitely need to have that, where it's the peak demand, and you can just up it and lower it at any time.
And you also, I mean, let's say you're a logistics fleet. You also need to know if there's a problem. You need an alert to say this vehicle isn't charging, or isn't plugged in, isn't charging. This isn't going to happen, so that something can be done about it in a timely fashion.
100%. And I think when you've got a portal, so like an EV portal at Drax, we have an EV portal that explains what chargers are in use at what time and kind of how many vehicles are charging. Now, also as well, it could be human error where people are forgetting to plug a charge cable in as well. So as a business, if you've got 10 vehicles on charge at one time and it only says on the system that there's only 9, you know which charge point's not working or why it's not working. And sometimes as humans, we do forget things. I'm sure we've all forgot to put petrol in our car many, many years ago. And I've always said to people, if you ever forget to charge, you'll never, ever forget to plug your cable in, because it's the same as a mobile phone. Once it goes dead, you've got to reboost it. So it's the same.
Oh, Dan, I have never run out of petrol in my life. But I have put diesel in my petrol car, and I have put petrol in my diesel car So things definitely go wrong with ICE vehicles as well.
Well, you don't get 4-star electric in this. If you remember the old 4-star days.
I do. Oh my goodness, I do. Yeah. Right. Okay. So great. I mean, we could have a whole GreenFleet talks about the software and load balancing because it's so important. As an energy company, I'm just going to throw out there, you understand the tariffs because it's not just about the physical constraints on the site; it's about the tariff constraints and optimizing so that you don't pay more than you have to. But let's just push on then. Bigger picture. Government is aiming for 300,000 public chargers to be available by 2030. Can't help but wonder if they're regretting putting that figure out there. But do you feel that this is achievable, and what are the challenges to meeting this target?
So progress to date would suggest not. So I kind of agree with yourself. It's kind of a big challenge, but I think it's still possible if the government and other organisations commit to this. So, for example, destinations can contribute to public charging and they can benefit about this financially. However, additionally, the number of public charging points may not need to be as high if organisations, workplaces, fleets, and the general public invest in their own facilities. So if people have their own home chargers and there is workplace chargers, is there a high demand for the public? And that might take the pressure off that. This will ease the strain on the public charging infrastructure. Therefore, it needs just not to be the government commitment, but the support of, as I say, other organisations. Admittedly, this might have to take government promotion to other benefits and other grants available to get people like the whole carrot on a stick, to get them hooked into that, because I think that will help ease the strain on the other public infrastructure as well. And there's other personal benefits that people are buying this for and reducing government targets. But first is beating the 2030 ban on the manufacture of sale of ICE vehicles or internal combustion engine vehicles. And there are many benefits in each route to market why they're putting these charge points in. So if you're a destination, for example, the charging benefits for them would be new revenue streams, would be competitive advantage over rivals. So, for example, do you want to go to a supermarket that's 10 miles away because they've got charging points, or do you want to go to somewhere 2 miles away that hasn't got them? A lot of drivers, if they haven't got that off charging facility or charging at home facility, they'll drive that extra distance. So you're actually losing customers to competitors. And in terms of destination charging as well, you can increase customer dwell time and average spends. They can go up as well. And then you can start to build in loyalty schemes and visits with kind of bonus cards that these supermarkets make. But when we go back to fleet, there's a lot of benefits for having electrification within your fleet. And one of them is providing charging for fleets, especially if it's peak or off peak. And you were saying before about the cost from the energy companies. And this is key because many companies, even if you're at a house, you might have off peak and peak charging. And as a business, you could save a lot of money if you just charge the vehicles throughout the night rather than at peak times throughout the day. But most importantly, you're providing reliable charging for fleets, and it's giving that confidence that you won't need to use public chargers if you've got the adequate infrastructure in place. And then operational efficiencies, so especially if investing in charging facilities at drivers' homes as well. That's you're doing it as kind of a fleet then, where your drivers are not going off buying different types of charging points and there's different reporting each month. If you buy the same products, it's the same reporting system for there as well. But then we touched on it before earlier, for workplaces, you might want to advertise and have benefits of workplace charging. And what's the benefit of that? Well, from a HR perspective, it's very good to retain new staff or keep existing staff because, it's kind of, well, why would I want to work for Drax? Well, they have charge points. Okay, well, I drive an electric car, so I need to have charge points at my work because I haven't got them at my home. And that can play a big factor in this. But most importantly, you can offer charging to all their employees. So you can kind of make it like a community hub between them. You can even have different pricing, alternative pricing in place as well. But charging facilities will offer a visible sign to employees, I would say, for commitment to sustainability, particularly impactful for community and visitors coming to your site as well. So it's kind of a lot, but there is a massive slow adoption at the moment. And what we've got to do is release the strain on the public network because there are so high numbers of that 300,000 public charge points. And organisations need to lead rather than follow, because at the moment there's a lot of blockages. I think us as humans are very like sheep, and we do follow other people and other companies, and if they're doing it right, well, it must be right, so we'll follow them. But what we need to look at is the cost of this as well. So is there help with the cost? Because as you can imagine, putting these 300,000 charging points in, that can be quite a strain. Is the government benefiting with other benefits and grants with this to help incentivize this 300,000?
I was going to say, because we have to be really careful here. The government isn't funding these 300,000 charge points. They are facilitating through legislation, through electricity network upgrades, the rapid charge, and they're working very closely with local authorities to make sure that they've got the knowledge and information that they need, plus some funding to deliver this. But the private sector is doing the heavy lifting on this without a shadow of a doubt, particularly on the rapid charging. Ultimately, we may not need 300,000, like you say. If we can get the workplace charging working well, we're seeing a big trend towards rapid and ultra rapid fast charging, which may mean that number doesn't need to be as high. And we need to see the utilization rates becoming more efficient as well.
And I think if you're doing high mileage, then you will need to be using these public charging points. Or if you haven't got a driveway, there's always going to be there.
Yeah.
But then I do also think that if you have got a home charger, or you have got access to charging at your workplace, in reality, how many times are you doing more than 300 miles a day without actually stopping at other places? And that can be kind of where, if you're, say, like a haulage firm or a logistics firm, they could actually put them in the customers as well. So while you're going out to do your deliveries, for example, you could actually just top up while they're there as well.
And I know that is very much being discussed. While you're unloading the truck, you can be loading with electricity.
100%. And while truck drivers or drivers are on breaks, or while they're loading and unloading, like you say, they can be topping the vehicle up. So it's not kind of like where petrol and diesel, where you can't have a mobile phone next to it because there's flammable risks. Where it's electric, you just plug it in, and as long as the business can then get them reporting of that usage, that's the key message, I would say.
Dan, thank you very much. We've covered a huge amount. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you for joining GreenFleet Talks, and of course, thank you to Drax. And thank you for watching. Please tune in to GF365 again soon.